Hello, everyone, and welcome to video 8. And in this video, we're going to discuss establishing healthy boundaries and communicating those to others, which means we're going to also touch on healthy communication, which is very important when you're establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries. So, we'll definitely touch on some techniques. I'll have to decide while doing this video if I want to do a separate video for healthy communication, which I might because that's very important. Like for you to establish and maintain boundaries, you have to be able to communicate your wants and needs and let people know when they are not respecting a boundary that you've created. And so one of the things I'll do is just kind of first define what personal boundaries are. And so personal boundaries are basically limits and rules we set for ourselves within relationships. And so a healthy person with boundaries can say no to others when they want to, and they are also comfortable opening themselves up for intimacy in close relationships. And so, oftentimes, when it's difficult for you to say no, it's also difficult for you to open yourself up for intimacy in close relationships because, you know, the fear of telling another person no, not trusting yourself to say no, and just kind of not understanding what your limits are can cause a lot of stress in relationships. And again, we'll discuss that more. So, a person who always keeps others at a distance, whether emotionally, physically, or otherwise, is said to have rigid boundaries. And of course, we'll get more into that in this video. And on the other hand, someone who tends to get too involved with others has porous boundaries. And I've already talked about the third type of boundaries, which is healthy boundaries, in the intro of this video. But of course, I'm going to go through and just kind of explain all three boundaries. But I just wanted to introduce why boundaries are important when you're going through the journey of just kind of processing your trauma, healing, and just kind of figuring out where you are and who you are after trauma, and also with other mental health issues. So let's get started. Okay, so the first type of boundary is a rigid boundary, and it's a little self-explanatory. But people with rigid boundaries, they avoid intimacy in close relationships. They're unlikely to ask for help. Have few close relationships. They're very protective of personal information. They may seem detached. Even with romantic partners, they keep others at a distance to avoid the possibility of rejection. And so, rigid boundaries is, it's just what it sounds like. You have this brick wall and you don't really let people in. And if you do let people in, there's still kind of this unspoken barrier between you and another person. And so rigid boundaries can be very lonely, very isolating. And it can be just as difficult as the next type of boundary I'm going to discuss, which is porous. So porous boundary is like it sounds also. Like there's no it's just like a sponge is porous. It just sucks up everything. So porous people with porous boundaries, they typically overshare personal information, like they tell you everything. Not all, but some of them will say, "Oh, I'm an open book." When you know they're giving you a lot of information. So difficulty saying no to others, to the request of others, excuse me. Over involved with others' problems, dependent on the opinion of others, accepting of abuse or disrespect, and fear of rejection if they do not comply with others. So that could be very, very scary for people with porous boundaries. They want to be liked, and a lot of their relationships depend on them responding in that kind of porous way. Like if I'm not saying no, then a person that doesn't respect your boundaries is just fine with you saying no. and they'll continue to stress you out or overuse you or even not consider your feelings. And so, healthy boundaries, you value your own opinion, which that means if so for you to value your own opinion, you have to have a level of trust in self. And that takes time because you have a tendency to lose that trust when you blame yourself for traumas or you blame yourself for other mistakes that you've made in your life, which in the previous video we discussed having compassion and forgiving yourself. um, you know, most of us need to practice forgiving ourselves the way we forgive others. The other thing is don't compromise values for others. And so when you have porous boundaries, you have a tendency to compromise your value system. So that means if you want to make friends, you will drink or smoke or, go to places that you don't exactly agree with because your boundaries are kind of porous and you don't want to tell your friends no because then they won't be your friends any longer. People with healthy boundaries, you share personal information in an appropriate way. You don't over or undershare. Um, you know personal wants and needs and you can communicate them. You accept no when others say it to you. And that's really important too because, some people get very offended when they're told no. And no is just me deciding that this isn't a good idea for me. This doesn't feel good to me. So I'm gonna say no. And typically when you're good at saying no, you can respect someone else's no. Okay, and so with discussing boundaries, you also want to understand that sometimes people can have a mix of different boundary types. So some people can have healthy boundaries at work, porous boundaries in romantic relationship, and a mix of all three boundaries within their family. And so it's important to go back again to the previous video to be self-aware. Like where are my boundaries porous? Where are they rigid? And where have I established healthy boundaries? I think especially paying attention to the healthy boundaries so that you can just kind of copy that elsewhere in your life. So if you have healthy boundaries at work, well, what am I doing at work that I'm not doing at home or that I'm not doing in my romantic relationship? And just remember that, like, don't take that so literally because work is work. But still, like, having healthy communication, telling people you're overwhelmed or not accepting tasks or works, that's outside your job description. Um, the appropriateness of boundaries depend heavily on the setting. So what's appropriate to say when you're out with friends might not be appropriate when you're at work. And so having healthy boundaries will help you navigate those situations a lot better. Um, and so within having three types of boundaries, there's also a set of like six just kind of subtext subsets, excuse me, of boundaries. So physical boundaries, that refers to your personal space and physical touch. Healthy physical boundaries includes an awareness of what's appropriate and what's not. In various settings and types of relationships, hug, shake hands, or kiss. Physical boundaries may be violated if someone touches you when you don't want them to, or when they invade your space, for example, rummaging through your bedroom. Okay, so that's a physical boundary, and so a lot of times, so if we have overall porous boundaries, and someone violates that physical boundary, it's going to be very difficult for us to say no, stop, don't touch me, don't put your hands on me, don't don't do this. I'm uncomfortable and I'm going to report this or report you. That's very hard to do because early on, sometimes we're taught that our physical boundaries don't matter. One example everybody uses now, and I'm really glad they do, is making a kid hug or kiss a relative that they're uncomfortable with hugging and kissing. Well, right there, you're breaching a personal boundary. I just saw a video today of a mom feeding a baby, and the baby kept saying no. I'm assuming she smelled the food and she was like, I don't want this food. No. And mom just fed it to her anyway. Well, she gagged and she retched and she eventually puked. And it's because she had already said, I don't want that food. And to me, that was a breach of a physical boundary. And I know that seems small, but those things, if you allow someone, or you, I don't want to say allow because really it's your boundary, so you establish it. But if you respect another person's boundary, it helps build their confidence and it makes them feel a little bit better about um, navigating that just kind of situation when it comes up the next time. So if you start small and continue to practice, when that time comes, you can say, hey, don't put your hands on me. I remember being young and having a older person touch me uncomfortably, but then I remember just not saying anything and thinking, oh my goodness, what's happening here? And in my situation, it was just kind of a really like close brush. It was still inappropriate, but it was a, close brush. And in my head, I had the dialogue, but I never said anything out loud. But I definitely, where I am now, I would definitely say something. Intellectual boundaries. It refers to thoughts and ideas. Healthy intellectual boundaries include respect for others' ideas and awareness of appropriate discussion. Should we talk about the weather or politics? Intellectual boundaries are violated when someone dismisses or belittles another person's thoughts or ideas. The best statement I can think about when you talk about intellectual boundaries is let's agree to disagree. Most people argue because they want you to think and believe the way think and believe. Well, I mean, having a respect for other people's intellectual boundary means understanding and respecting that you're going to think about things differently. Um, Nobody has to agree with you. Now, you have to rethink that if you and a person have to be in a shared space. But for the most part, people are allowed to think what they want to think, you know. And but again, when you talk about the larger picture, I'm talking about a smaller picture. I'm not talking about politics, science, or things like that because that's group and everybody's going to have an opinion. But when it comes to your personal intellect and your opinion about the small things in your world, you're allowed to have your opinion and you have to allow people to have theirs too. Emotional boundaries. That refers to a person's feelings. Healthy emotional boundaries include limitations on when to share, when not to share personal information. For example, like gradually sharing personal information during the development of a relationship. Now, that's a bit, so to me, it's a little bit scary when I hear about people meeting one another and they become like your immediate best friend. Well, you don't know enough about a person for them to become your immediate best friend. And so that's a red flag to me when it comes to porous boundaries. Um, because if you meet someone and like them, that's fine. That's all you know in that moment is I met them, I like them, period. Because most people want to be liked and they're going to make minor adjustments in who they are and how they operate so that they can be liked. And so you have to give yourself time and that person time enough in that relationship to just kind of relax and become themselves so that you can understand, okay, well, we do click, we do like each other, this is a healthy relationship. And this is as opposed to just kind of revealing everything to everyone. You don't have to tell everyone everything. um, Emotional boundaries are violated when someone criticizes, belittles, or invalidates another person's feelings. Now, emotional boundaries are really important. I all of them are important. But this one is really important to me because in my work with rape and molestation victims, I have been very, very surprised by the amount of people who want to know personal details about what actually happened to you. Years ago, I had um, sessions with a rape victim, and it was highly publicized. Lots of people knew about it, and she eventually had to stay home because whenever she tried to venture out and someone recognized her, they would ask her what happened. And this was amazing to me because I still to this day, I can't think about someone actually asking another person those kinds of details. I would never want to do anything like that. Like, so I want you guys to understand when it comes to emotional boundaries, you have to have healthy boundaries here. If this is someone you don't know, you don't trust, and you can say absolutely no. Like, that's personal and I don't want to talk about that. That's really uncomfortable. And if it's making you feel uncomfortable, you can definitely say, well, it makes me uncomfortable when you ask me questions like that. I find that deeply personal and I feel disrespected or I am very confused by this. Whatever you want to convey to that person, you're absolutely allowed to because they have just they're trying to breach a boundary that you've established. Now, sexual boundaries. This refers to emotional, intellectual, and physical aspects of sexuality. So, healthy sexual boundaries involve mutual understanding and respect of limitations and desires between sexual partners. Sexual boundaries can be violated with unwanted sexual touch, pressure to engage in sexual acts, leering, or sexual comments. And so, for me, sexual boundaries are, again, really important. They're all important, but this one is really important. I always tell my young adults clients, I mean, even my young clients too, because, I'll have young teenagers who have decided that they want to have sex. And I think that's the important part of sexual boundaries. If you have decided that you want to have sex, then you get to decide what that looks like. So I get to decide if I just want my sexual exploration is just touching right now. If that's all it is, that's all it is. So that means the boy or girl that wants me to do more of that isn't for me because I've already decided my boundary is just kissing and touching right now. So if someone tries to do something beyond that, then you get to say no. And if they don't listen to your no, then you get to tell an adult that will help you, tell a friend that will help you, tell someone who can help you in that situation. And understandably, I know it's scary, um, but it's very important for you to establish what what sexual boundaries is what sexual boundary, excuse me, is comfortable for you. Um, some people are very, very open. Some people aren't. It's okay if you aren't, and it's okay if you are. Again, it's what's comfortable for you. And I will say this too. Most of us most of us know that there's an unspoken sexual boundary. Like, we're not going to go up to someone and just kind of grab a breast or grab a butt because we know that's wrong. We have these unspoken rules when it comes to sexual boundaries. So when people are breaching that, they know they're breaching that, and you get to say, no, 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 please don't touch me, please don't put your hands on me, and definitely talk about this further with your therapist because I think it should be explored and discussed more so that you can feel empowered about your sexual boundaries. And that means establishing and communicating. So you also have material boundaries. This refers to money or possessions Healthy material boundaries involve setting limits on what you will share and with whom. For example, it may be appropriate to lend a car to a family member, but probably not to someone you met this morning, which that makes sense. I don't know who would do that, but material boundaries are violated when someone steals or damages another person's property, or when you pressure them to give or lend their possessions. And so people can be very loose with your material boundaries. I remember my older sister always borrow money. She would always borrow money, but then she would magically have money all the time. And I came to the realization once I became an adult, like, well, she has money all the time, but she's borrowing it all the time. And so my boundary with her was, no, I'm not going to lend you any money because one, you borrow money from people all the time, and two, you spend our money, but then you have your own money. So that was my boundary. No, you won't get any money. You can't borrow clothes, shoes, because you don't respect my property when you have it. And it's okay to say no, because no can be very, very uncomfortable. And after I explain this last boundary, I'll discuss why I don't want to say why no is so scary, but I'll discuss how I became less uncomfortable with the word no. So the last one is time boundaries. It refers to how a person uses their time. So to have healthy time boundaries, a person must set aside enough time for each facet of their life. So just each section of their life or aspect of their life, such as work, relationship, and hobbies. Time boundaries are violated when another person demands too much of another's time. And so it's basically people not respecting your time. Like if you tell your mother that you have to study for this big exam, and then she calls you later and says, well, I told my friend Rebecca that you would babysit her kids tonight. Well, I just told you I had to study for a test. I can't watch these children and study for a test. And so it's important at that time to say, well, Mom, I hate that you did that, but I have to study for this exam. And I get that's going out on the limb. Like some of us can't say that to our mothers in that way. So that may have been a bad example. But when you get older, you can just definitely, show people that they need to respect the boundaries that you've established. Um, so some of that takes, before I get into that, I'm going to go back to the no. So I worked retail. I worked retail for 11 years while I was going through school to be a therapist. And when I first started on the floor, so our company wanted us to sell shoes. Well, I mean, of course we sold shoes. I work at Foot Locker, but they wanted us to sell a sneaker, a cleaner, or a sock or a shoelace. You always had to go to the counter with two items. And that made me so uncomfortable because it's like if they came in for a shoe, that's all they want. And so eventually I got over the word no because I understood that, because for a long time I wouldn't ask. I just get in trouble for having the one item. But then when they threatened to just kind of fire me, I was like, okay, I gotta have the two items. So eventually I learned that if someone says no to one thing, it just means they don't want that one thing, and I can ask them for another. So if you buy your shoe and I ask you if you want shoestrings, no, I don't. But do you want socks? Yeah, sure. I'll take some socks. Yeah, those are really cute. And so no became less scary when I understood that one, it's not going to kill me if someone says no. And then two, maybe someone is saying no because that thing isn't comfortable for them, or that's not the thing that they want. And once I realized that, I was fine. No is no. I'm good. Um, and I don't mean if they say no, to coerce them to do something else, just being okay with the fact that they said no to that thing and just letting it be that. Um, okay, so one of the ways you can communicate your boundaries is with assertive communication. And I teach assertive communication because some of us struggle with communicating in non aggressive ways. Um, Assertive communication is a really useful tool for helping you balance your relationships and it'll help you get, I don't want to say it helps balance your relationships. It helps you communicate your needs so that you can get your needs met, and it'll help you create a healthier relationship. And so assertive is again in the middle. Most of what you'll hear me say is I'll talk about balance, I'll talk about middle, just because a lot of times people think and do things in extremes. And if you come to the middle, you'll be able to see whether you need to, one, sometimes you need to stay in the middle, but then you can see whether you have to be left or right. The middle gives you just a really good line of sight. Um, you'll be able to see both sides. So with passive communication and porous boundaries are kind of the same. With passive communication, you just kind of let people, you don't express your opinion. You let people say just pretty much anything to you. You keep everything to yourself, and that's eventually sometimes passive people will blow. Eventually, I'm gonna blow up and curse you out or hit you or do something to you because I've held on to this thing I wanted to say or do for a while. And so you want to be very, very careful about passive communicators. Sometimes, if you know a person is that way, you want to check in on them and make sure the things that you're doing or saying, if it's okay with them, because they haven't learned how to communicate it. And asking if it's okay with them will help them understand, oh, I can say that this is uncomfortable for me. But again, we'll talk about that in another video. So aggressive communication, okay, that's the loud communication. That's the yelling, that's name calling, that's getting in your face. And some people communicate aggressively as a protective measure, because if you won't listen to me when I'm saying something calmly, by whether I'm saying it verbally or whether I'm giving you physical messages that I'm uncomfortable, okay, so now I have to come for your throat. You don't want to listen, I'm going to make you listen. And this time I'm going to make you listen. I have to raise my voice, I have to get in your face, and I have to let you know as loudly as I can that I'm uncomfortable or I don't like what you're doing. And so assertive communication, um, people are uncomfortable with it because it seems rude. And it seems rude because depending on how you were raised, like I'll speak for myself. Like I was raised that children should be seen and not heard. And because culturally, if you talked back to an adult, you were seen as disrespectful or you were seen as rude. And also culturally, I'm saying this because it matters in regards to a cultural aspect, but I'm a Black woman. And so speaking up for myself can look aggressive. It can look aggressive and it can look like I'm this just kind of mean or angry person. And so for a long time, it was very difficult for me to express myself, trying to navigate all of the cultural things by being a child that should be seen and not heard, or being an angry Black girl, or just all this weird stuff that happens, that society creates for other people. But finally, I realized that I had to start speaking up, because when I didn't speak up, I was in more pain. I was being put upon, like people would just volunteer me for things, not consider me, not ask me if things were okay, make assumptions. I mean, it was all bad. But when I decided that I could say, that doesn't feel comfortable to me, or that doesn't feel good to me, we need to stop, or we need to rethink this conversation because it doesn't seem to be going well. So let's pause and figure out where we went wrong in trying to communicate with one another. My daughter and I, we have timeouts. Okay, so let's take a timeout because you seem upset. I know I'm getting upset, and so not that it works perfectly, but we'll do the timeout. And I think, what assertive communication means, you can say, I need this to stop. I need you to I need you to not yell when you speak to me because it makes me feel uncomfortable. Right? That doesn't mean, stop yelling at me because it's making me mad and I'm gonna yell at you back, which that'll eventually start a fight. But if you say, hey, when you yell at me, it makes me really uncomfortable and I don't know if I can continue this conversation, that's different. That's saying exactly what you need, and it's saying exactly what you want. And it's not aggressive. And then it's also communicating it, because if you're passive, someone can say something to you that's hurtful and you won't say anything. You'll have a mental conversation. Or I can remember in the past, because I definitely was a passive communicator. In the past, I would have thoughts in my head, like I would have this running dialogue, like, "Ooh, I should have said that. That would have been really good if I said that." And so now I don't have many of those opportunities where I should have said a thing, because now I understand that um, I don't know. I definitely understand that what I think, feel, and want, it matters. And if it matters, then I should be able to communicate it. And it does take practice and time to do that. And so when you guys are talking to your therapist, let them know, like, I want to communicate my wants and needs better. I want to communicate my wants and needs more. In For me, if you're in a relationship with another person, they should be aware of what you want and need. I don't like the whole idea of, well, they should know. Well, nope. No one should absolutely positively know something about you, especially if it's something that you're thinking or feeling. Don't make a person assume those things. Communicate them. That's assertion. I'm going to let you know that, one, this doesn't feel good. We need to change this up. Or, you know what, this was really a great day. I think we had a really great conversation. I really love how you just communicate with me. I really appreciate that you considered me that day. I really want to spend more time with you. I enjoyed you. And those are just examples, because to me, that's assertive also. Because I don't think in relationship we tell one another how we love each other, how we feel connected to the other person. Like, saying those positive things assertively will help you say negative things assertively, I guess, is what I'm trying to convey. I don't want to get on my soapbox about communication, because I think we're going to do that in our next video. But guys, boundaries are important. I know, talking about sexual boundaries is very difficult. And if I said anything triggering, please talk to your therapist about it. It wasn't my intent to trigger. I tried to be very careful in that section. But I think sexual boundaries is the same way with, other personal boundaries. Sometimes we're not taught that we can communicate those boundaries to other people. And if if you get anything from this video, just understand that you have agency over yourself, which that means you have control over you. You get to choose what's best for you. You get to tell someone that that doesn't work for me. You get to tell someone, well, that does work for me. You get to decide so many things for you. And I know sometimes when you're depressed or anxious, you can feel very